He was a lonely rancher who thought he had closed his heart forever. She was a mysterious woman he found half frozen in his barn. As he tried to help her, she made a desperate, terrifying plea, "Please, don't pull the blanket." The secret she was hiding beneath it would not only stop his heart, but change his life forever. This is their story. For Elias Thorne, a blizzard was just another form of silence. For 5 years, since cholera had stolen his wife and young son, silence had been his only constant companion. His ranch, nestled deep in the remote Wyoming mountains, was his fortress against a world that had taken everything from him. At 45, he was a man weathered by grief, his face a roadmap of sorrows, his heart a locked room covered in the dust of memory. He lived a life of rigid routine, mending fences, tending his small herd, chopping wood, each task a defense against the ghosts of laughter that once filled these empty rooms. This storm, however, was different. It was a monster, a white hurricane that screamed with a fury he hadn't seen in years. It had trapped him inside for 2 days. The world outside his window, nothing but a swirling vortex of white. It was on the evening of the second day, as he was adding another log to the fire, that he felt a sudden, sharp unease. It was a rancher's instinct. Something was wrong. The cattle in the barn, usually quiet during a storm, were restless, their low, agitated bellows, barely audible over the wind. Cursing under his breath, Elias pulled on his heaviest coat, grabbed his lantern, and ventured out into the blinding chaos. The wind tore at him, the snow so thick he could barely see the path to his own barn just 50 yards away. The barn door, usually secured, had been blown open by the storm, its hinges groaning in protest. That was it. That was what had spooked the cattle. As he fought his way inside to secure the door, the lantern light cast dancing shadows across the hay-strewn floor. And then he saw it. A dark, huddled shape in the corner of an empty stall, almost completely covered by a mound of snow that had blown in through the open door. His first thought was a wolf, seeking shelter from the storm. He raised his lantern higher, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at his hip. But it wasn't a wolf. It was a person. He moved closer, his boots crunching on the frozen hay. It was a woman. She was unconscious, her face deathly pale and blue with cold. She was wrapped in a thick, heavy wool blanket, now frozen stiff and caked with ice and snow. She looked young, a refugee from a world far from these harsh mountains. Elias's heart, a thing he thought had turned to stone, clenched with a forgotten empathy. He had seen death by freezing before. It was a quiet, insidious killer. He knew he had to act fast. Without a moment's hesitation, he gently scooped her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, her body stiff and cold. He carried her through the raging storm back to the warmth of his cabin, his own body shielding hers from the worst of the wind. He laid her on the thick bearskin rug in front of the roaring fire, the warmth of the room immediately beginning to melt the ice from her clothes. Her survival was his only thought, and it was that singular, compassionate focus that would lead him to the precipice of a secret he could never have imagined. Back in the warmth of the cabin, the reality of the situation settled upon Elias. He had a stranger in his home, a woman on the brink of death. His instincts, honed by years of solitude and survival, took over. He knew the first step was to get her out of her frozen clothes and wrap her in dry, warm blankets to fight off the deadly chill. The thick, coarse wool blanket she was bundled in was a cocoon of ice, a frozen shell that was trapping the cold against her skin. It had to come off. He reached for the edge of the blanket, his calloused fingers fumbling with the stiff, frozen fabric. It was heavy, strangely lumpy and uneven beneath the surface. As he found a corner and began to gently but firmly pull, a low groan escaped the woman's lips. Her eyelids fluttered, then snapped open. Her eyes were a startling, pale blue, wide with a terror so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the room. They weren't the unfocused eyes of someone waking from unconsciousness. They were sharp, lucid, and filled with a desperate, animalistic panic. She jolted upright, clutching the edges of the frozen blanket with a strength that seemed impossible for her fragile state. Her voice, when it came, was a raw, broken whisper, a plea that was more of a command. "Please, don't pull the blanket." The words, so strange, so desperate, stopped Elias cold. His hands froze in midair. He stared at her, utterly bewildered. He tried to reason with her, his voice low and calm, explaining that the wet blanket was killing her, that he needed to get her warm. But she only shook her head frantically, her grip on the blanket, so tight her knuckles were white. The terror in her eyes was not just of him. It was of what would happen if the blanket was removed. And so began the strangest standoff of Elias's life. He, the master of his own solitary world, was now a helpless guest to the terror of the woman he had just saved. Respecting her desperate plea, he backed away. He could not bring himself to use force. He brought her a steaming mug of hot broth, but she refused to let go of the blanket with both hands to take it. She would only release one hand at a time, her eyes never leaving him, while the other clutched the bundle to her chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He watched her for hours. His mind, a practical rancher's mind, raced through the logical, terrible possibilities. Was she a wanted criminal, hiding a bag of stolen gold beneath the blanket? Was she terribly wounded, perhaps disfigured, and hiding a gruesome injury she was too ashamed to reveal? Was she concealing a weapon, waiting for a moment to strike? Every possibility was darker than the last. He kept the fire roaring, hoping the warmth of the room would be enough to thaw her from the outside in. As the night wore on, he noticed her movements. She was not just clutching the blanket, she was comforting it. He saw her hand move in a slow, rocking motion beneath the thick wool. He heard her whisper to it, soft, foreign words that sounded like a lullaby. The bundle was not inanimate. It was something else, something she was protecting with her own life. He felt a shift within him. His suspicion began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching curiosity and a powerful, unbidden wave of protective instinct. This woman was not a threat. She was a guardian. She was a mother bear, wounded and cornered, protecting her cub. But what was she protecting? What secret, so precious and so terrible, could be hidden in the folds of a simple wool blanket? He knew he could not force the answer. He could only wait and offer a silent, patient safety. He banked the fire for the night, took his own bedroll on the far side of the room, and settled in for a long, watchful wait. The mystery of the woman and her blanket filling every corner of the silent, snowbound cabin. The night was a long vigil. Elias barely slept, his gaze drifting from the swirling snow outside the window to the woman huddled by the fire. She too was awake, her body tense, her eyes wide and haunted in the flickering firelight. She had not let go of the blanket. She sat like a statue carved from fear, a silent guardian of her own inexplicable secret. Elias felt a profound sense of frustration and a deeper, more unsettling empathy. He had brought her here to save her from the cold, but he was beginning to realize she was trapped in a different kind of winter, one that raged within her own soul. He must have dozed off, for he was jolted awake by a sound. It was not the wind, it was not the fire. It was a sound so small, so faint that it was almost imperceptible. A thin, reedy whimper, like the cry of a newborn kitten. The sound came from beneath the blanket. Elias sat bolt upright, his heart stopping in his chest. He stared at the bundle in her arms, his mind refusing to process what his ears had just heard. It was impossible. Lena's face, in that moment, crumpled. The fierce, protective mask she had worn for hours shattered, replaced by a look of pure, heartbreaking despair. Her secret, the one she had fought so desperately to keep, was out. With trembling, defeated hands, she slowly, agonizingly, pulled back a corner of the heavy wool blanket. Elias leaned forward, his breath caught in his throat. And there, nestled in the folds, was the source of the sound. A baby, a tiny, newborn infant, so small and fragile it hardly seemed real. Its face was blue with cold, its small body barely moving, but it was alive, a living, breathing secret. The sight hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. All his dark theories of stolen gold, of hidden weapons, of gruesome injuries evaporated in an instant. This was her secret. This was what she was protecting, not out of malice or greed, but out of a fierce, desperate maternal love. The suspicion in his heart didn't just fade. It was burned away, replaced by a massive, overwhelming wave of emotion, shock, awe, and a protective instinct so powerful it felt like his own heart was breaking and healing all at once. He remembered his own son, so small and fragile in his arms. The lonely rancher, the man who had lost his own family, was now face to face with a new one in the most desperate circumstances imaginable. The time for questions was over. The time for action had come. The baby's weak cry was a call to arms for them both. Elias, his mind snapping into focus, moved with a new purpose. He stoked the fire, adding logs until it blazed with a powerful, life-giving heat. He filled a basin with warm water from the stove, his movements sure and steady. He was no longer a suspicious host. He was a partner in this desperate fight for survival. Lena, seeing the genuine, raw compassion in his eyes, finally let go. The tension drained from her body as she allowed him to help. Together, they worked in a quiet, unspoken synergy. She, with a mother's instinct, showed him how to hold the baby's tiny head. He, with his surprising gentleness, bathed the infant in the warm water, his large, rough hands incredibly delicate. They wrapped the child in a soft, clean linen cloth from Elias's own sparse supplies. He then disappeared into his workshop and returned moments later with a small, sturdy wooden crate. He lined it with his own softest wool shirt, creating a makeshift cradle, which he placed right by the hearth. In the warmest spot in the cabin, Lena watched him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. This silent, gruff man, who she had feared just hours before, was now building a cradle for her child. She prepared a bottle of diluted cow's milk, warming it by the fire. She was weak, her hands shaking, but she showed him how to test the temperature, how to feed the baby with a small piece of cloth soaked in the warm milk. They did not speak of the past. They did not speak of the danger that had driven her here. Their entire world, in that long, quiet night, shrank to the single, sacred task of caring for this tiny, fragile life. Through these shared, silent actions, the first real bond was formed. He saw her fierce, unwavering maternal love. She saw his deep, compassionate strength. In the heart of the blizzard, warmed by the firelight, a fragile, unconventional family was being born. With the baby finally safe and sleeping soundly by the fire, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. The storm still raged outside, but inside, the storm of fear and suspicion had finally passed. Elias looked at Lena, truly saw her for the first time. The terror in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, bone-deep exhaustion, but also a flicker of something he hadn't seen before: gratitude. He knew she owed him an explanation, but he did not press. He simply waited, letting the quiet of the cabin offer her the safety to speak when she was ready. After a long silence, she began to tell her story. Her voice was low and trembled at first, the words heavy with trauma, but it grew stronger as she spoke. Her name was Lena Petrova. She had come to America from Russia 2 years prior, not as an immigrant seeking a new life, but as property. She had been sold by her destitute family to a man named Ivan Morozov, a brutal and powerful man who ran a syndicate supplying labor and women to the remote mining camps and railroad settlements. He was not a husband, he was an owner. His cruelty was a daily reality, his control absolute. But in the bleak darkness of her servitude, there had been one sliver of light. A young surveyor named Daniel, a kind, gentle man who saw past her circumstances and saw the woman beneath. They had fallen in love, a secret, dangerous love conducted in stolen moments and whispered promises. Daniel had saved every dollar he earned, planning to buy her freedom from Morozov and take her away to start a new life. And then, she had discovered she was pregnant with Daniel's child. It was a secret that filled them with both terror and a fierce, defiant joy. It was the catalyst they needed to finally escape. But Morozov had discovered their plan. His rage was monstrous. He and his men cornered Daniel by the river. Lena, hiding, had watched in horror as they killed the man she loved, the father of her unborn child. She had managed to escape into the wilderness, pregnant and alone, with Morozov's men hunting her. This was the plot twist she revealed, her voice breaking. Morozov believed she was carrying a valuable asset, his property, but he did not know about the baby. She had given birth just 3 days ago, alone, in the heart of the blizzard, in a hastily made shelter. The birth had been difficult, and she was certain the baby had not survived. It was only after she had collapsed from grief and exhaustion that she heard a faint, miraculous cry. The baby was alive. It was then she understood the true, horrifying nature of her situation. She was hiding not one life, but two. She explained to Elias, her eyes wide with the terror he could now fully comprehend, that Morozov was not just a cruel master. He was a man obsessed with control and possession. To him, her child by another man was the ultimate insult, a symbol of her defiance, a loose end. If he ever discovered the baby was alive, he would not hesitate to silence it, to erase the final piece of the man who had dared to defy him. Her desperate plea, "Don't pull the blanket," was not just to hide her child from a stranger. She was hiding her child from the entire world. She believed that if she could keep the baby a secret long enough, she could reach a distant sanctuary, a Russian Orthodox mission in the north, where they could finally be safe. As her story ended, a profound silence filled the cabin. Elias now understood everything. The depth of her courage, the reason for her terror. He, a man who had lost his own family to the indiscriminate cruelty of disease, was now faced with a woman and child being hunted by the deliberate cruelty of man. He looked at the sleeping infant in the cradle, then at the exhausted, brave woman who had fought so hard to protect her. The choice he had made in the barn to save a stranger from the cold now felt small. A new, far heavier choice had settled upon him. To truly help them meant to stand against a man like Morozov. It meant inviting a war to his doorstep. It was a choice that could cost him everything. But as he looked at the fragile new life sleeping by his fire, he knew it was a choice he had already made. Lena's story, told in the dead of night, sealed their silent pact. The blizzard raged for 2 more days, trapping them in the small cabin. But it was no longer a prison. It had become a fortress, a tiny island of warmth and safety against the hostile world outside. In those days, a new, fragile routine was born. Elias took on the role of protector, his quiet, steady presence a constant reassurance. He never left the cabin for long, his rifle always within reach. He chopped wood, tended the fire, and shared his meager supplies without a word of complaint. Lena, her body slowly recovering, focused all her energy on the baby, whom she named Anya, a name that meant grace. She began to see that Elias's kindness was not a fleeting impulse, but a deep, ingrained part of his character. She watched the way his large, rough hands could be so gentle, as he added a small piece of wood to the fire, careful not to wake the sleeping infant. She saw the profound sadness in his eyes when he looked at the cradle, a sadness she now understood came from his own deep well of loss. They were 2 strangers, bound by a shared secret and a shared understanding of grief. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was pristine and silent, covered in a thick blanket of new snow. A fragile peace settled over the ranch. Weeks passed. Anya grew stronger, her faint cries turning into healthy coos. A hint of color returned to Lena's cheeks. For the first time since she had escaped, she felt a glimmer of something she thought was lost forever, hope. They developed a comfortable rhythm. He would work outside during the day, his presence a protective circle around the homestead, while she cared for the baby and turned the small, masculine cabin into a warm and welcoming home. The smell of baking bread began to mingle with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Laughter, quiet at first, then more frequent, began to echo in the rooms that had been silent for so long. Elias, a man who had thought his life was over, found himself looking forward to the end of each day, to returning to the warmth and light that now filled his home. But the peace was a lie, a beautiful, fragile illusion. They both knew Morozov was not a man to give up. The outside world began to intrude in small, chilling ways. One afternoon, Elias rode to the nearest settlement for supplies, a journey he now made with a heavy sense of dread. The store owner, a man he had known for years, mentioned that a group of rough-looking, foreign-speaking men had passed through a week ago asking questions. They weren't asking about a woman, they were asking about a lost piece of property. A few days later, while checking his fences at the far edge of his land, Elias found it. A single, distinctive footprint in the mud, left by a type of expensive, city-made boot that had no business being this deep in the mountains. It was a message. They were being watched. The hunt was not over. It was just beginning. He didn't tell Lena about the footprint, not wanting to shatter the fragile piece she had found. But a new, cold vigilance entered his eyes. The fortress he had built was about to be put to the test. The monster was no longer a distant memory. He was a shadow, circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. The threat, once a distant shadow, arrived with the suddenness of a lightning strike. It was a cold afternoon, the sky the color of slate. Elias was outside, splitting firewood, when he saw them on the ridge. 3 riders, dark silhouettes against the gray sky, moving with a cold, predatory confidence. His blood ran cold. He recognized the man in the lead instantly, even from a distance. Ivan Morozov. There was no time to run, no time to plan. There was only time for a single, decisive choice. He dropped his axe and strode quickly to the cabin. His face was a grim, unreadable mask, but his eyes conveyed the urgency. "Take the baby. Go to the cellar. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" Lena stared at him, her face draining of color. She saw in his eyes that the moment she had been dreading her entire life had finally arrived. She didn't question him. She simply nodded, her eyes wide with terror, snatched the sleeping baby from her cradle, and disappeared through the hidden trapdoor in the floor that led to the small, cold root cellar. This was Elias's all-in moment. He was no longer just providing shelter. He was now an active accomplice, a shield standing between the woman and child he had come to care for and the monster who had come to claim them. He slid a heavy bearskin rug over the trapdoor just as the heavy thud of fists hammered on his front door. Elias took a deep, steadying breath, his face settling into a look of weary indifference. He walked to the door and opened it. Ivan Morozov stood on his porch, flanked by 2 of his thugs. He was a man whose cruelty was a palpable aura, his smile a thin, predatory slash in a pale face. "A storm is coming. My men and I seek shelter." A lonely rancher, like you wouldn't refuse a little company, would he? Elias looked past him at the darkening sky, then met his cold gaze. He made his choice. He lied. "I am a man who values his privacy, but the laws of hospitality are clear. You may shelter in my barn until the storm passes. My house is my own." He had drawn the line. He was offering the bare minimum, a clear signal that Morozov was not welcome. It was a dangerous gamble, a direct challenge to a man who was not used to being denied anything. Morozov's smile tightened. He pushed past Elias and stepped into the cabin, his men following close behind. His eyes swept the room, cold and calculating, taking in every detail: the single plate on the table, the empty cradle by the fire, the second and used coffee cup. Very private indeed. Almost looks like you were expecting company. A woman, perhaps? "I am looking for a piece of property that has gone missing." "A young woman. You wouldn't have seen her?" The cat and mouse game began. Elias maintained his stony silence, shrugging, telling him the wilderness is full of lost things. The air in the small cabin was thick with unspoken threats. Below the floorboards, Lena held her breath, pressing Anya tightly to her chest to stifle any sound. Morozov's eyes lingered on the heavy bearskin rug that covered the cellar door. He took a step towards it. Elias moved instantly, casually, to block his path, picking up the coffee pot from the stove. "Coffee's cold, but there's whiskey in the cabinet if that's more to your taste." It was a deliberate misdirection, an offer of hospitality that was also a warning. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the 2 men stood locked in a silent battle of wills. Morozov was testing him, searching for any flicker of fear, any sign of deception. But Elias's face was a mask of granite. Suddenly, from the barn, came the sound of a loud crash, followed by the frantic whinnying of horses. Elias didn't flinch, but Morozov and his men spun around. It was the diversion Elias had been praying for. An old trick. He had left one of the stall doors improperly latched, knowing his most spirited horse would eventually kick its way out and cause a commotion. Damned horse. Happens every time a storm brews. The spell was broken. Morozov's attention was diverted. Annoyed by the delay and convinced by Elias's unshakable calm that the woman couldn't possibly be here, he made his decision. This quiet, stoic rancher was not a man who would harbor a fugitive. She must have pushed on and likely perished in the blizzard. A waste of my time. We ride. As Morozov and his men stormed out to wrangle their spooked horses, Elias watched them go, his body rigid until the sound of their hoofbeats finally faded into the distance. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He stumbled back, his legs weak with relief, and knocked on the floorboards. The trapdoor opened, and Lena emerged, her face pale, tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. The immediate threat was gone. He had done it. He had faced the monster at his door, and, with nothing but his wits and his courage, he had won. They were safe, for now, and in the shared silence of the aftermath, they both knew that their lives were now permanently, irrevocably intertwined. The day Ivan Morozov rode away from the ranch was the last day fear lived in their home. The threat of his return lingered for a time, a ghost at the edge of their peaceful existence. But as months turned into a year, and no word came, they knew they were finally, truly safe. The world had swallowed the monster, and in his place, a family had been allowed to grow. 1 year later, the lonely ranch was lonely no more. It was a place transformed. A vibrant garden bloomed where there was once only packed earth. Small, hand-carved wooden toys were scattered on the porch, and the silence was no longer empty, but filled with the happy, babbling laughter of a child. Anya, no longer a fragile infant, was now a healthy, curious toddler. Her bright eyes a perfect reflection of her mother's. She was the heart of their new world. Elias was a different man. The deep, sorrowful lines around his eyes had been softened by constant smiles. The quiet, solitary rancher had become a doting father, his large, powerful hands now masters at the gentle arts of tying tiny bootlaces and wiping away tears. He had found, in this unexpected family, the piece of his soul that he thought cholera had stolen from him forever. Lena, too, had been reborn. The haunted, terrified woman who had collapsed in his barn was gone. In her place was a woman of quiet strength and radiant happiness. She was a partner, a mother, a homesteader. She was, in every sense of the word, home. One warm summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching Anya chase fireflies in the twilight, a comfortable, familiar silence settled between them. Elias reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. Their life together had been built on unspoken promises and shared actions. But tonight, he needed the words. For 5 years after my family died, this house was just a place to sleep, a place to hide from the ghosts. I never thought I'd feel a thing again. He turned to her, his eyes shining in the fading light, his love for her open and absolute. You and Anya. You didn't just bring life back to this ranch, Lena. You brought it back to me. We were the ones who were lost, Elias. You were the one who gave us a safe harbor. And in that quiet moment, they both knew the truth. He had saved her from the storm. She had saved him from the silence. And the tiny, precious secret she had hidden beneath her blanket had been a miracle in disguise, a gift that had healed them both. They were not a family born of blood, but one forged in the heart of a blizzard, built on a foundation of courage and sealed by a love as quiet, as strong, and as enduring as the mountains themselves. If this story of a secret that changed everything warmed your heart, click the video on your screen now for another unforgettable tale from the Wild West. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us which part of the story you love the most. Your support is the secret to our success.